session number 6 of the workshop. And since, although we had dinner with him, I think it's still appropriate to have a proper roundtable, so Yahli will know exactly who's sitting here and not just what they like to eat and how they like to drink. So the deal is still a deal. We end with the speaker, will present herself, and then start the presentation. So
should I start? Okay. Hello again, everyone. I'm always Julia Bai again, and I'm a postdoc fellow at the University of Pavia in Italy, and I also have a research position in the Observatory of the Bridge Foundation in Milan, which whose main work regards research and advocacy in health rights. So public health is the other field I'm working on. And yeah, thank you very much for the invitation and the suggestions you just gave me. They were precious. So.
Oh, this way? All right. Okay, and the odd chance that Yahli doesn't, who I am still, which would be a shame. My name is Magda Pachowska. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the Astor Institute in The Hague. We met only 5 years ago at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And these days, as I told you yesterday over dinner, I'm working on new technologies and IHL.
Yahli should know.
You should know me as well. He told me.
Camilo.
Hello, my name is Camilo Ramirez. I'm a lawyer from Colombia. I'm Netherlands, the National University from Colombia, and a student of Master of Philosophy. I work in Special Jurisdiction for Peace. I am a professor in Bosque University about IHL, memory, justice, and reparation, and interpretation law. And my current topic is about the use at value in non-international armed conflicts.
Hi. I'm Elena Fidel. I'm an SJD candidate at Georgetown University. I'm in my 3rd year.
Hello, my name is Diletta Marchesi. I'm originally Italian. I'm currently based in Belgium at KU Leuven, where I'm doing a PhD in international criminal law. In particular, I'm writing on the war crimes of denying a fair trial. And at this workshop, I presented something very different on the regulation of disinformation in international humanitarian law.
Hi, I'm Yahli. I'm a member of the faculty here at Haifa Law. I write on international law, mostly on IHL, new technologies, informal lawmaking, and I'm really happy to be here. I'm a previous postdoc at the Minerva.
Hello, my name is Kaja Kowalczewska, and I'm a postdoc at the Digital Justice Center at the University of Wrocław, currently focusing on new technologies in criminal justice, especially preparing the project on smartphone evidence, but my PhD was devoted to IHL and actually the applications of artificial intelligence for targeting. So that will be actually my, let's say, follow-up. This presentation and the paper I prepared for workshop is kind of a follow-up of the discussion of lethal autonomous weapon systems. Okay, so as you see, the title may be somehow perplexing, but the idea of thinking bayonet is not a new one. I will tell you something about it in a few minutes. I was trying to find a new framework to discuss lethal applications of AI. But before coming to the topic, I would like to start with 3 small side notes. I invite you all to follow our news at Digital Justice Center. We have English speaking seminars next Tuesday on new technologies approach of Strasbourg Court. And we are a great team of researchers, as you can see on the photo, and we would love to welcome all of you in Wrocław. We have funds to sponsor you to come and talk to us about your research, so please follow us. The second disclaimer is that as I'm participating in those workshops for the second time, and last year I prepared a paper that was apparently composed of 2 papers. This year I took the liberty to prepare something according to less is more principles, so I'm very open for all the comments and directions that I should look for in my research. And the second disclaimer is that this is about lethal applications of AI, and I'm somehow assuming that in future states may develop that kind of weapons, but it's not that I'm the huge fan of this solution, but I also want to be realistic, and having in mind the state of discussions in Geneva, I think that we are no close to a ban of that kind of weapons, so we have to start thinking about particular technical and legal regulations that could be of help in an operational context of that kind of weapons. And my paper is based on technological assumptions. First, it is that I don't know if you heard about default autonomous weapon systems, but those are the weapons that are generally accepted to be defined as weapons that are identifying, selecting, and engaging targets without something called meaningful human control, without human interaction impact on the decision-making process. So this definition somehow assumes that coding law of targeting into the code of the AI or the technological solution implied in that systems is possible. That's a huge question and still not not answered by practical solutions. So I also assume that apart from legal norms, we should also include their ethical and social norms. I will develop on that later. The other problem is that in my paper, I will discuss the somehow legal challenges that assume that from technological point of view, it is possible to create that kind of machines and that they are sufficiently operational and reliable for military to be used. And also, I think that one of the most important assumptions, which is also very important for academia, is that for this phenomena to happen, we need a closer cooperation of IT people with lawyers and not only also specialists in other human sciences. So the structure of the paper is threefold. The first is somehow the outline of this thinking bayonet doctrine, which is linked with the manifestly unlawful order doctrine. Then I will shortly outline the state of discussion on the technological side, and then I will somehow approach the practical solutions and safeguards about which we should think if we accept that this kind of weapon can be used and being legal. So the introduction, the whole concept of this future weapon is based on the fact that maybe we will come to that kind of technological solution that will be able to replace human soldiers, human elements in targeting. So if we want to replace humans, we should probably apply similar requirements and legal to that kind of machines. Of course, the current prevailing attitude is rather pessimistic, first of all, because of the moral panic started by NGOs coalition that led to talks on international level about that kind of solutions. And of course, lack of trust into AI solutions and into our political governments and military powers that can develop that kind of weapons. And the basic assumption, as I said, is that we need the technological solution to be there to really discuss the legal challenges, because for the moment we are only based on some kind of scenarios, invented scenarios that may not be true or accurate. But one of the baselines is that in order to apply legal norms, we would need a technological solution that would emulate human brain, because they are so complicated that we are discussing those norms for decades now, and we still are not sure how to do it. So human brain and intelligence can be technologically, let's say, based. That's one of the assumptions. And why to discuss this topic? Because, as I said, the development of this kind of weapons is somehow probable, because there are, as always, pros and cons. And there is a huge potential in significantly lowering the suffering incurred during warfare. And I will also tell you in more details about other advantages that that can support the development of these weapons. And I start from the assumption that to talk about that kind of weapons, we have to think about adequate design and the design approach towards weapons that is based also on the historical analysis of weapons regulations. It's not that we only discuss the effects of weapons, but also how they were designed and for which purpose they were meant. So if we somehow accept the acceptability of that kind of weapons, we have to think how to design them. And one of the ideas I thought about is how to make sure that those weapons won't be used for illegal purposes, mainly to commit war crimes, and how we can use them to stop them from exercising illegal and unlawful orders. So the historical approach is that before Second World War, subordinate soldiers, were perceived rather as a tool of warfare. They were subject to orders of their commanders, and commanders were bearing the main responsibility for mistakes and all the violations. And that's why they were called, let's say, the soldiers were called somehow blind bayonets, because they were just supposed to fulfill orders. But with the experience of the Second World War, we had the development of this thinking bayonet doctrine, and the experience showed that there should be some limits to the obedience and military discipline. So even the regular soldier is not exempt from criminal liability and shouldn't follow all the orders. And thus we have the doctrine of thinking bayonets, or bayonet intelligent, and that doctrine was coined by International Military Tribunal for Germany at the trial of major war criminals, where the tribunal, in response to so-called Nuremberg defense, or just following orders defense, that exactly was following the previously blind bayonets approach, said that, and based its reasoning on Article 8 of the Charter, that the most brutal, heinous acts like torture, killing, that is not justified, are illegal under international law. So even subordinate soldiers should know that, and they cannot hide behind the order. So the court said that this is a universal principle derived from law of the nations, and actually it is when you follow the order, it can be a mitigating circumstance, and this doctrine was adopted by next criminal tribunals, not in exact same manner, but I'm not going to discuss this now. And the basic presumption of this doctrine is that the soldier is a moral agent, so he has an ability and possibility to reflect on his or her own actions in broader situational context. And for that, to see whether this possibility was there, because ability is drawn from the human nature of a soldier, and possibility is based on the context and factual circumstances. So the test of moral choice was developed, and it's based not on the fact that the order was issued. That's not enough. We have to see whether the soldier had the possibility to say no to that order. So as in Erdemowicz case, it was said whether he was in a situation that didn't come to the situation that he had to choose between killing someone or getting killed. And there was some other situations that were also enumerated in several different jurisdictions when this possibility of denying unlawful order were not there. So actually when the self-survival of the soldier was endangered. So of course with autonomous weapons, we don't have this issue of self-survival. So that problem is somehow not there. So I was also trying to track the shifting approach to the soldiers and the obedience. So as before we had the blind bayonet, so passive obedience, you have to listen to almost everything. Then active obedience with this exception of following unlawful orders. And now we have something called discipline to disobedience, which is based mainly on the mission command doctrine, which I will tell about in a second. So maybe to just speed up, I would say that with the developments of the law after Second World War, we had one of the consequences is that humans on the battlefield became subjects of law and regulation, not only objects. And this is with the human rights development and also a shift provoked by development of technology. And nowadays we have this mission command doctrine, which aim is to give an order to a soldier, but not as like to say what specifically has to be done, but to give the aim of the order. So the soldier that is enoughly trained and entrusted by the commander can grasp the l'esprit, the spirit of the order, and can decide on a proper execution of the order according to the factual circumstances. So this whole doctrine is based on human cognition. So again, human elements, and this is also for young soldiers. So there is no, let's say, structure which soldiers are with which rank can follow that doctrine, but it's mainly in for whole army. Of course, armies that are professional, usually in democratic states. Of course, it is a doctrine developed by US, and it's characterized by decentralized approach, distributed leadership, and trust in judgment, in human judgment. So we see that maybe weapons that are machines won't fill this gap and this doctrine. So from blind bayonets to thinking bayonets is to show the technological discussion. So currently algorithm-based systems that are supporting military decision-making are widely used, but they are algorithm-based, and AI is much more advanced and challenging technology. And here are some challenges and assumptions about the application of AI. So apart from the technological, political, social, and ethical issues, we know for sure from the statements of states at the Geneva Forum that all new weapons will have to be in compliance with IHL. So we have the problem of the basic principles and how. Oh, sorry for the errors on my side. So the principles of distinction, proportionality, precautions that are based actually somehow on human judgments will be very hard to implement in the AI. But as I said, once we are there, there are new problems. The technology is still not there, and we actually have to still look for trust solutions for something that is more predictable and trustworthy than current technology. So the currently existing systems can be called rather blind bayonets because they don't have this cognition issue. There is no human brain emulation. They cannot even see and differentiate things. So this is just like, let's say, joke. They are really blind. So what is this new wave of AI development, and that is somehow promising to have this kind of solution one day? So we came from narrow AI that was able just to implement basic rules. Then we are in domain-specific machine learning, so somehow more sophisticated, but rather automated than autonomous. And in future, maybe we'll have the solution that will mimic human persons. So this AI system will be more as a colleague or brother in arms than a tool of warfare. But it will have to be able to understand the context and reason in context. So maybe also apply law. Why we are discussing this? Because military usefulness of that kind of weapon is pretty high in some cases, as Sean was said, and that kind of technology is rather regulation resistant. If someone is interested in factors that are enumerated as decisive for regulation of certain technologies, military usefulness is one of them. And the military usefulness is that we can have an increase in range and time of military operations, and they can be used for 4D missions, so the missions that are dull, dirty, difficult, and dangerous for humans. Well, we can also have this political impact that soldiers are staying home, nobody is getting killed. So this is a hard-winning argument. And some also claim that those will be cleaner wars. And of course, the slogan, robots don't rape, which is appealing, but also a bit populistic. So also states agreed that that kind of weapons will be not only different in the level of autonomy, but also different in nature. So they actually pose new challenges, and this human factor is one of them. That will be a qualitative change because we won't have humans. So this actually forces academics about reflection on what is the place of human in execution of orders, targeting, and warfare. And I argue that we have to, bless you, consider it already now when we are still not there. There is also a huge business mobilization against the development of such weapons. So you probably heard about several open letters that were signed by many scientists, huge business tech companies, and they are all against development of AI for the purposes of weaponization. Of course, not all of the uses are as challenging as for killing people. And the whole discussion about AI, not only in military zone sphere, is somehow recalling two principles: technological neutrality, saying that technology is not bad in itself, it is just how we use it. And I think that it's too simplistic as a statement. And the other is the search of robust and trustworthy AI. For sure, for you observing EU talks, you know what I mean. And many initiatives about trustworthy AI are being developed now. At the same time, the business is saying that we cannot really trust AI now. So there are those challenges. And then when we talk about acceptability of such weapons, we have to also think, when is the moment when we can accept that kind of weapons? And this is an open question. I'm just trying to give some maybe hints. Where can we find answers? When can we accept this kind of weapons? So reliability, we would have to look at currently used weapons. What is the error rate that is acceptable? And what are the safeguards, safety valves that can be applicable also to that kind of systems? So I came across the 1% threshold. So 1% of actions can be types of mistakes, and this is based on Krupi, I don't know how to pronounce it correctly, research. That's a researcher that compared the statements of states on the use of cluster munitions and anti-personnel mines. What is the reliability threshold for states who are not party to convention prohibiting conventions prohibiting that kind of weapons? So we see that this is a pretty high standard when it comes to that kind of weapons. Probably in practice, it's not there, but at least this is the opinion of states. So if we attain almost this 99% standard with AI, that can be very important for the humanization of warfare in future, because if we don't have those mistakes that are the main reasons for legal reasons for prohibiting that kind of a weapon, we can actually achieve maybe something better. And of course, this is the way to minimize this errors, malfunction, I didn't know how to write it, that we discussed yesterday, and how to minimize, how to ensure this 1% threshold. So of course, all that is about training and testing that kind of weapons. And in this context, what is the most important part of that weapon is the AI engine, so this decision-making part. And of course, there are some challenges because we don't have the precise model of the real world, and testing them in the secluded areas, as argued by, for example, Michael Schmidt, in the desert, in the submarine, undersea and outer space zones, is not really relevant for us in the modern conflicts, totally urbanized areas and full of people. So that's one of the challenges. And the second is something I already told about, emulation of human brain. And when I read about the research findings of non-legal scholars, they said that actually to be able to do that, we would have to socialize the robots, the AI, and because it is very hard to really say how without our, let's say, at least 18 or 16 years of experience of living in society, we can perform some tasks and obey to law, etc. So then many people, as usually as the last part of their papers and presentation, they say that we have to include some safeguards. And usually they recall some safeguards like self-deactivation, self-neutralization, or also self-destruction, even of that kind of systems, which is, of course, a useful solution, but maybe not that acceptable, especially self-destruction for all states. And I was thinking about something more, maybe how to put this way forward for the humanization of warfare. So also the whole discussion about responsibility for use of that kind of weapons is somehow centered around the fact that there are errors, there has to be someone responsible for that errors. So maybe how to do to minimize the rate of errors is to also include some kind of solution to for those weapons to refuse illegal orders. I will tell you now who can actually issue such an order and why. Coding, let's say, soul and brain, because it's not about only about reason and logic that legal norms are about. It's based on the prohibition that is in IHL on carrying out manifestly unlawful orders, which is based on basic IHL consideration of balancing humanity and military necessity and moral agency of human soldiers. So this manifest unlawfulness criterion is the objective one. We use it to presume the subjective knowledge of unlawfulness of the order for the reason for the sake of ICL. And we take into consideration many factors like rationality of the soldier, level of training, experience, education, and factual circumstances, so case-by-case approach. So it seems that it's very hard to really build one standard of manifest unlawful order that could be transposed to the AI and coding and testing, etc. And I also found a very interesting observation that nowadays this unlawful order exception is also very hard to prove because we have a clearance from legal advisors, and soldiers cannot really be entrusted with that whole testing in individual case because there are so many safeguards in their training, discipline, hierarchy, and existence of legal advisors that once this order was, let's say, proved by a lawyer, it's very hard for a regular soldier to decide that this was really illegal and I cannot follow that. So in order to be able to include that kind of safeguard, we would have to think about reason and logic that are basically the assumptions of application of legal norms, but also something that is still in development. So the impact of emotions of humans on performance and compliance with IHL and adherence to social norms, especially in those rich contextual situations when we cannot ex ante really think about all possible consequences of a certain action in a complex environment like city, town, or a place where we know that there are civilians DPHing, civilians not DPHing, combatants, and it's very hard for humans, what is more harder for machines and AI. So that AI would have to have the situational awareness somehow transposed into the code, or even the advanced situational awareness. So many challenges. That shouldn't be to train brain. Why to, yeah, I don't remember what was the word here. Training, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so how to train the brain of AI, of advanced general intelligence, so this third wave of development. And so I think that, again, this is like coming to my conclusions, we have to apply the design-based approach, and we have to think now about how we're gonna build that kind of technology. So this is again against the technological neutrality principle that we are actually responsible for the development of that kind of weapons, and we have the responsibility for that. It's not a legal argument, more ethical one. And I was trying to figure out how can we actually encode all those problems and norms into AI. So maybe we can build some predictable scenarios, but then there are other scenarios that we wouldn't think about. We can try to maybe somehow analyze past experience, case studies, case law of international criminal tribunals when the orders were manifestly unlawful, and what kind of red lines could have been drawn from that. And we can try to code the normative framework of targeting process, which is hard. If you have more ideas, I'm very open for that, for this discussion. And I think that this is the last slide almost, the two required breakthroughs to go with that whole idea that we have, and something that we talked about on the first day. Manu talked about that we actually need this serious and honest involvement and responsible involvement into the compliance with IHL, not only thinking about prosecuting the violations, but thinking about it a step before the disaster, the suffering incurred by warfare. And if we want this technology to be at least equal or better than humans, we have to think about also what is harmful about human factors. So think about ways how people and our human nature can, let's say, pollute the AI algorithm. And those are two cases when actually this AI trained and perfect in the application of IHL and other legal norms could have been used for human purposes. So as we know that there is a possibly accountability gap when it comes to individual responsibility, some could think about using machines to hide the responsibility, to give unlawful orders and then say that that was just a malfunction or an error. So we would have to think about ways of stopping that, and then of course the hostile interception by enemy that would like to know the technology, but also then use it as a smokescreen in a smokescreen action. And that's the end of my time. So just to sum up, I think that the technology is not really neutral, and we have to think how we shape it. And once the technological solution is there, because in my opinion, the technological development is one of the main arguments why we don't have that kind of weapons. But if they are there, we have to think how not to duplicate our shortcomings, and what is the place of harmful human actors. Thank you.
So, hi everyone again. Thanks, Kaja. I very much enjoyed reading your piece. And I want to start by saying that I really like the basic assumptions that drive this piece. One is the suggestion to move beyond current debates on laws, and I think that we talked about it over dinner, and I think that this is a really interesting avenue. And I also like the focus on humans, to think about soldiers and what does it tell us about regulation of autonomous weapons. I do want to offer some maybe general thoughts about the paper, and then maybe just a couple of smaller points. The first is that I think that even when moving beyond the current debates, it's necessary to engage with these questions in the piece, right? So if we think about the big debates over laws, about responsibility, about human in the loop, about other questions, I think that the key issue is to think to what extent or how focusing on illegal orders engages with these debates. It wasn't always clear to me, right? So maybe focusing on suggesting this is these are the current debates, these are the legal issues. When I offer to move beyond it towards thinking about illegal orders, this is how reality changed, this is how the law will change, I think it will be clearer to the reader. The second is that I'm not sure, and I would love to hear more about it, to what extent, right, the mere definition of AI is something that mimics humans is really the basis for why we have laws or the promise of autonomous weapons. I would say that the goal is not to mimic humans. The goal is to minimize suffering in warfare. And if this machine can do it by acting very differently than humans, maybe there's no problem with it, right? So, and if we think about it, and you go back to it at the end of the paper, but it seems to somehow be in contrast or conflicting with the beginning of the piece, humans are awful at war, right? First, they can be evil, right? Plain evil. But even if they're not evil, they can be stupid, they can be afraid, they make so many mistakes, and tired.
Vengeful.
So many things, right? So this suggestion that these machines need to act like humans seems to me maybe a bit problematic in this sense, right? What we want these machines to do is to be effective in war, and at the same time, as lawyers, minimize suffering or follow the law as it is. So I would like to hear more about it. The third general comment that I have, and this goes down to the heart of the piece, that I really wonder about the choice to focus on illegal orders in the discussion. And I hear, and I think when you talked about your current interest in criminal law, I understood maybe better why you chose this path. But it seems to me that the current discussion is more protective than what you're suggesting, right? Because we need, and it goes back to your discussion about safeguards. Safeguards come to the play when something is wrong. mostly when we think about malfunction, right? But if the autonomous weapons function properly, they should follow IHL. Illegal orders come only when there's a violation of the law, right? So I would think that proper application, proper work of autonomous weapons will never bring about questions about illegal orders because they will just follow IHL completely. So I wonder when does this problem comes to play? If it's not. So if we have malfunction, right, so we can have this button that just shuts it down. But you suggest to design the system in a way that takes into account the discussion of illegal orders, but it seems to me that illegal orders is a step at the responsibility stage, accountability stage, where we know that there was a violation and we have state responsibility. So the problem is of individual criminal responsibility of specific people, but we have no doubt that there is a state responsibility for violation of IHL. And if we have an autonomous weapon here, that right, and we assume that it will be actually deployed only when its design makes it compatible with contemporary IHL, I wonder where does this come to play in real life. And now maybe just, I maybe have thought at the end about the place of this question, but I'm not sure and I would love to hear more about it. So some really small points. Ray, first, I'm not exactly sure that your discussion of the pre-World War II state of affairs regarding illegal orders is 100% accurate. So, for example, if you look at Gary Solis' piece in the Journal of International Criminal Justice discussing illegal orders, he gives examples starting from the 15th century of soldiers that were responsible while trying to argue that they just followed orders. So I'm not sure that pre-World War II soldiers had the defense of just following orders all the time, right? Okay. And a second small point is, again, here, I'm not 100% sure that your discussion about the differences between algorithmic systems and artificial intelligence is I would like to hear more about these definitions, because it seems to me, right, that the discussions of algorithms are part of the general discussion of AI, and while we have constant debates about the definition of AI, it seems to me that it's often part of the definition and the discussion. The third small point is that, again, I'm not sure about the 1% rate of mistakes argument. And now when you suggested that it comes from cluster munitions, I can understand why it might make sense there, right? We say there's a limited value of these weapons, and we got to the conclusion that 1% rate of mistakes makes it problematic. But I think that the debate regarding autonomous weapons, or at least a reasonable position, says we need to compare it to human rate of mistakes, right? So if an autonomous weapon makes less mistakes than humans, let's say 20% mistakes, humans do 40% of mistakes, then maybe it's still better. I think that there are reasonable arguments, right, that go in a different direction, but I wonder why 1% of mistakes should be the answer. And also, in your discussion, and this is my last small point, I think that you should take into account other factors when you discuss the deployment of autonomous weapons, it seems that in all of your discussion, you assume a universal deployment of such weapons. So, right, the deployment of autonomous weapons in urban settings is extremely challenging. But a significant number of the solutions to the question of autonomous weapons suggest that it should be deployed in a limited or area-specific scenarios. And I think that it solves much of the problem that you suggest, and I think that it should at least be mentioned or addressed briefly in the piece. And now maybe just to conclude, I think about the way forward, like what I think that, because I do think that the general framework, as I said, is really interesting about going beyond our current discussions on autonomous weapons and focusing on humans. So first, when it comes to unlawful orders, it was really interesting, I think, what you have mentioned at the end of your piece and your talk about manipulations by operators. And here I think that also the discussion of unlawful orders is really interesting, right? About why they give the unlawful order. So focusing to some extent on the person that operates it and tries to suggest that it's some malfunction. I think that it might result in right responsibility gap. And I think that these are actually examples that do not take that are not addressed sufficiently in the literature on responsibility. I think it's really interesting and maybe something that is worth developing. And the other thing is that I think that what your discussion opens a possibility to think broadly about what humans bring to the equation that is beyond the current discussions. And I thought about things like compassion, about behavior beyond what law requires. And I think that these are things that are highly important to us, and we assume that they exist, but it is not manifested in the law. So think, for example, right, we have so many anecdotes. If you read An Unjust Wars of Walzer, he starts with several anecdotes about World War I, how soldiers acted in benevolent ways towards the enemy, even if it was lawful to target them. And I think that actually this is a huge problem with AI systems that just follow the law. And I'm not sure, and I think that it's a strong argument when it comes to their deployment, and maybe again, this is also a direction that is worth thinking about. So thanks for the opportunity to read it.
So can I just address shortly the small things before we go into the questions, so we don't repeat maybe some misconceptions. Thank you so much, Yahli, for the questions. I really appreciate it. As I said at the beginning, I just thought about this topic and how I'm quite frustrated with the current state of debate, so I was trying to maybe find a new way forward. And why I have focused on illegal order, I know that is not totally the best approach, but when I thought about this formulation of IMT that humans should be thinking bayonets, I thought that maybe we are coming there with machines that are thinking, but of course this is just a metaphor and not very, it's not precisely what was meant by tribunal when saying that. And what you said about the before Second World War regime of illegal orders, I just mentioned a short phrase that, of course, there were some national legislation saying that manifestly unlawful order is not an exemption of responsibility, but I didn't study this. Probably Ziv could have added something more. Yeah, and so those are the two first. And what's the difference between our algorithm and this future AI? Let's say this more advanced. Of course, that's a huge debate that I, at least as a lawyer, I'm struggling with. And for the sake of discussions and simplifications, that are being used for this debate. Like Harvard program is using this war algorithms term, and to say that those are kind of limited, that algorithms, how I understand and I approach that algorithms are somehow controlled, more controlled than future AI that is more unpredictable. But of course, I don't have this technical knowledge, and I'm sure that algorithms are also unpredictable, and there is no sharp distinction. It's just for the sake of let's say simplification of the debate, and I understand that those algorithms are more limited in their possible solutions that they can give. This is my approach. The 1% rate is, of course, pretty controversial, and I was just happy to see that kind of finding in literature, because during discussions in Geneva, there are no concrete, the precise answer for that. But I'm a bit struggling, because if we accept that the machines, the laws shouldn't replace humans, or they shouldn't really mimic humans, then why should we compare them with humans and not with other weapons that states are using, right? So that's, of course, one of the arguments, and we would really have to decide what is the applicable framework. Are we treating those weapons as separate objects or subjects of army, or just weapons? And then according to what we choose, we would have to compare. And I would love to hear about more, especially from you who have military experience. What is or maybe you know about some kind of standards used by states to evaluate the reliability of weapons. And of course, structure more restricted areas and more restricted scenarios are a possibility. And I believe that this is going to be the place where that kind of weapon is going to be used. But we also have to think about other options, especially with the rogue states. And I really love the part about the emotions and the place of humans and how we perceive war, and how the debate on laws is biased by the fact that we want perfect solutions, while we don't accept we don't require perfect solutions at this moment. And if some of you have more comments on emotions and the role of humans, I would really love to discuss it. Thank you. That's my reply to the reply. So do you have any comments?
Yes.
Of course. Of course. I haven't read your paper as thoroughly as I promised you to do it, and I will come back to you with comments, like with track changes. And we'll have this conversation later on, because I really don't want to hijack the rest of the session, but I have 4 main points. The first one, just to wrap up about the emotions discussion, I had a very interesting chat about it with Michael Mayer, Bergen Bruges. And he made something that I think I'm going to quote a lot. And he said that it is his experience that the more a person has, the more military experience a person has, the less they are optimistic about the human emotions on the battlefield. And this is, I can see some of you guys nodding, and there is something to it. And it is my personal belief that relying on emotions and this line of scholarship is going down the rabbit hole, because we would have to account for all range of emotions, as Yahli mentioned. So that's the first easy point. A major problem I had with your talk right now was the fact that you used to refer to these weapons as if they were one category. There is no such thing as these autonomous weapons. And it might have been a shorthand to make the presentation more legible for those without background in autonomous weapons. But I think that by doing so, you might have fallen a little bit into a trap of overly simplifying the existing technology. It's my problem as well with majority of scholarship, which seems to suggest that there are autonomous weapon systems which are capable of freely selecting targets, especially human targets. That doesn't exist. And I think it's important to underline. Even the existing close-in defense weapon systems like Israeli David Sling or Iron Dome they still select weapons from predefined classes. So, and these are only material objects, but it gets lost somewhere. And when we simplify the discussion for, I don't want to say general public, because this definitely isn't a general public, but I think it's important to be more nuanced and make a distinction between weapon systems with some autonomous functionalities, usually when it comes to ISR, so intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance options, and there is a very limited class of weapon systems in which rely on machine learning, so they can flag a potential target. But to say that,
okay, just I will stop you here because I'm not talking about the existing weapons, and I gave the definition that this is something that is maybe going to be created in the future, and it will be. And I gave you the definition that is being repeated now, and which is excluding the existing systems.
Right, but I still think that the discussion about potential future systems needs to be tied to the trajectory of how technologies are developing, because without doing that properly, I think we risk going into complete science fiction.
May I add, yesterday, Ziv told me during the break, because when I mentioned submarines yesterday, he made a strange face. So I asked him to elaborate on that. And he told me that actually there is a sort of diagram that's basically represents that the technological developments have already reached their peak, and now like in the 70s, then there was a plateau, and then it had another peak, but now we are plateauing again, in a sense, like regarding the technological developments also applied during wartime. I'm just really mentioning what he said to me yesterday.
No, I know where you're going with this, and there is a risk of rogue states creating ridiculous weapons with with present Terminators and all the stuff we see in the movies. But I think this could be a little bit more nuanced, especially since I know you've worked on this before, so you have it somewhere already written. It's just in this paper it doesn't come out as strongly as you would probably like. I think that it's an interesting approach to focus on the legal orders, but you might want to flip it on its head and phrase it as a potential additional layer of protection when we talk about weapons because these days we talk about weapon systems and ask whether or not they have a possibility for a human to overrule the decision and seize the the order or whatever is about to be fired. So to stop the human. No, the human stopping the weapon, which is already the weapon system, which is already operating. If you flip the question and say, maybe we should think about having weapons which would kind of have additional red light flagging when it's clearly, or not clearly, but it might potentially be disproportionate, or I don't know, like that we have weapons which can detect, a large number of humans. And if we see that, humans are not reacting, there would be an extra layer of, warning signs. And if this is implemented in a weapon system, so as I'm trying to say, additional layer of protection against executing manifestly illegal orders, that might be more, I think it could add more to the existing debates. And I will stop here.
Thank you.
Just two things there, what Magda said, following my suggestion at the end to focus on the humans that operate the systems or those that initiate. So it's interesting whether as part of AI assisting systems for decision making, you can include legal evaluation of specific decisions to allow soldiers to better grasp the legal risk for their decisions. Or to go in this direction. I think that there isn't much wrong in this issue, right? So we focus on the fear from
machines,
as you suggested, right? We tend to focus on the danger of these systems, and if we think about the benefits, we often focus on actual benefits on the battleground. Right? So you can think about either minimizing risk to civilians or being really efficient in the battlefield. Here, I think, right, enhancing legal understanding is something really interesting, even though I doubt that it's actually possible when it comes to proportionality and other issues, but at least some indications. Yeah.
So I think, yeah, my point is about proportionality and kind of going back to you pushing on why focusing on illegal order. And when I was reading your paper, I was kind of thinking there was a recent paper that Daniel Statman posted with other researchers questioning whether or not people can understand what proportionality actually means. So like the gray zone, like the really clear lines, most people understand like very clear, disproportionate. Majority of expert and lay people would know, but the gray zones, there are a variety of chances and options to take. And even within like experts, so expert academics and military, there are like variety of options to be made. And then I was kind of like wondering, can we really train an AI to be able to make those decisions and to have this capability to then minimize human suffering? So it's just like a thought of maybe putting it out there and
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. I have to say that I try to avoid those questions because they are so much discussed. There are so many propositions, and yeah, they are not going anywhere forward. But I have some ideas how proportionality could have been introduced. But of course, that's a huge question of transposition of legal norms.
Because then, if we're only focusing on this, like very, it's clear that it's a violation. What happens in those other cases, because that's like kind of the thing I'm thinking about. Like if you are proposing this weapon system and you're saying like it could
be better
in those areas, but then it doesn't give a solution on the other, then what is the added value, and is it that much of an added value? Just as a pushback and like as a.
Can you tell me what's the offer again?
Yeah, Danny Statman.
Okay.
I think I can find.
Okay, thanks.
May I ask you one thing? It's something that struck me in your response to Yahli. You mentioned algorithms are controlled, but they should be designed. So I was wondering what is, like you mentioned, the control aspect and the design aspects. And what do you think are the consequences of like having something that is controlled versus something?
Well, I rather meant that the current discussions are mainly saying that algorithms are rather, there are always exceptions, automated. So there are limited numbers of possible scenarios that can result from a given situation and conduct, and the autonomous, and many people relate to AI that is more advanced and sophisticated than algorithms. We have unlimited number of possible scenarios. So, and the first stage, let's say automatic, is you do one, you have always the one result. So that's the simplified
No.
version.
It's just, at some point I got it blurred, so I was asking for a clarification for me. Okay, thank you.
So, yeah, I'll give myself the floor. Very interesting. You received most of the comments, so I'm going to go to the different type of comments. And I'm thinking very out loud as we're talking basically about upcoming developments, not necessarily lex lata. What if instead of trusting completely the machine to actually do the analysis, or for us just to be able to train the machine to take into account IHL consideration, we try to incorporate in some way IHRL as well into the considerations. And then question of the right to life, which I know that you looked into, might make it more complicated, but it might lead us to some kind of result which harms the potential damage of that machine and include some of what could be considered the compassion elements, which doesn't go as far as the human version, but still would take into account question of necessity and proportionality from a different framework within the discussion, and might have some positive effect on the outcomes.
Yeah, I think that's actually one of, if all those scenarios happen, but to make them happen, states would have to really be specific about their understanding of their obligations, proportionality, where is the application of human rights, when they complement, in what way. And so probably that won't happen because no state would like this kind of solution that would make our job easier. But of course, for the sake of simplification, again, we are talking about IHL, but of course, human rights apply. Other systems, other regimes apply. So that's just I was always fascinated by the mere possibility of translating norms that we don't understand. I still, after so many years, don't understand some provisions, yeah, with the interpretation, what we all discussed today in the morning, the mere definition of the framework, right? So maybe that's a good idea, and maybe another reason why those weapons won't be developed. Thank you.
Any more questions, comments, suggestions, ideas?
Lunch.
Maybe just one last small point that I don't want to forget. You focus on discretion as something that is integral to the contemporary way that soldiers act, what you call the operational setting and so on. And I wonder whether it's a military strategy notion or IHL one, because you use it as a basis for legal discussion, but it seems to me that two things. A, it's a military strategy notion, and I don't think that necessarily it has IHL implications. And the second thing is, I think that military cultures really diverge among states, and I'm not sure that this approach could really be found in every. We see now in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine that there are very different cultures regarding the amount of discretion given to regular soldiers. It affects the effectiveness of fighting and so on. So I think that you shouldn't take it for granted that this is the prevailing approach.
No, of course
under which
not.
soldiers act today.
No, but just to comment on that, the discretion thing for sure doesn't appear in, if it does, correct me, in any provisions of international humanitarian law, but it appeared on the meaningful human control, human factor. Those new words and notions are repeatedly reappearing at the Geneva Forum, CCW, and that relates to this human factor. And when it comes from the military perspective, that's also helpful. And of course, I would imagine that if that kind of weapons would be developed, they would be state-tailored, because each state has different doctrine, culture, legal obligations, right? So of course, yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.